These are the replica sneakers, an iconic and highly acclaimed footwear design by the high fashion house Martin Margiela. And this is the German army trainer, a cheap military surplus sneaker. But the difference is obviously easy to spot. The first one is known for its minimalist yet distinctive aesthetic. This sneaker often features a contrasting rubber sole, while the uppers are crafted from premium materials like nappa leather and suede. It comes in a wide range of colors, leathers, patterns and even hand-drawn designs, making it a sought-after staple in the fashion world. Its timeless design and versatility have cemented its place as a must-have piece for fashion enthusiasts and collectors. But of course, this level of prestige comes at a price. A pair of Martin Margiela replica sneakers will cost you between $600 and $1,000, depending on the retailer and the specific design. And the other one? Well, it's a cheap military surplus sneaker from a country that doesn't even exist anymore. You can pick up a pair for like $50 on German eBay, so one costs around 10 times more than the other. Which must mean that the designer brand's version is 10 times better, right? Well, let's take a closer look how we got here, where a luxury fashion brand is reselling military surplus with an absurd markup, and why sometimes just having an expensive logo might even add to the value of the shoe. So the story of the shoe begins in the late 1970s, in a country that doesn't even exist anymore, West Germany. At that time, the West German army was looking for a new shoe to equip its forces. And naturally, Germany's biggest sportswear brands, Adidas and Puma, jumped at the opportunity to score a lucrative military contract. Now this is where things get murky. Adidas claims that throughout the 1980s and 90s, they produced a shoe that later became known as the German Army Trainer. But according to the official records of the West German Army Museum, the original prototypes of what would later become the GAT were done by Puma. Strangely enough, Puma itself has no records of ever producing a sneaker for the German army. So who really invented the shoe? Well, at this point it doesn't even really matter. What does matter though is when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, marking the end of the Cold War and the unification of Germany, the German military underwent massive downsizing. And as a result, thousands of German army trainers flooded the civilian market. And this is how a few years later down the line, sometimes in the 1990s, the Belgian high fashion designer Martin Margiela discovered the German army trainer. And if we are to trust the brief description on the label, Margiela discovered them in Austria, not in Germany. He was so fascinated with the authentic military version that he purchased several dozens of them and then sent them down the runway during his spring-summer 1999 artisanal presentation. Also at first, Margiela's version of producing the shoe wasn't even production at all. Instead, the label bought up vintage military sneakers, cleaned them, swapped out the laces and the insoles, and then embossed Margiela's signature numeric branding onto the tongue. In some cases, they even repainted the shoes, creating unique, customized versions of the surplus military shoes. The most famous examples of these early Margiela Gats came from the 2001 and 2002 era, when the Margiela team painted over the gum soles of the sneakers and even added handwritten notes on the uppers. When you bought one of those, they also came with a note inviting you to add your own graffiti. But of course, flipping military surplus sneakers for astronomical prices could only go for so long. By the early to mid-2000s, Margiela had to move on from sourcing vintage military sneakers and started to produce their own ones. The new sneakers were simply called the replicas, and over time they became one of Margiela's most iconic products, the menswear equivalent to the Margiela Tabi. By the way, if you like these kinds of stories about fashion history, please subscribe. It helps me out a lot, and especially for small YouTubers like myself, it has a major impact. If not, that's fine, let's get back to the story. Today, the replica sneaker is a brand staple, reappearing season after season. But what is fascinating to me is that at one point in the 90s, the Gats and the sneakers that Margiela were selling were on a constructional and technical level the exact same shoe. But if you slap on the name of a high fashion label, one of them is suddenly so much more worth. So does adding a design label to a shoe make it suddenly so much better? Obviously not. Quick side note here. Now, whether the modern day Margiela sneaker is better than the surplus Gats on a technical and constructional level is a completely different debate. But I'm generally speaking very skeptical about this. I remember how sneakerheads and fashion enthusiasts have been raving for years that certain white sneakers, like the common project Achilles Low, are supposed to be so much better in terms of leather and construction quality than an Adidas Stan Smith, fully justifying their luxury price tag. But then Rose Anvil cut up a pair of common projects and revealed that the build quality is actually not that good. Certainly not hundreds of dollars better than a simple Stan Smith. And seeing that makes me wonder, do consumers actually know what good quality is in clothing and shoes? Now, I'm not saying that the Margiela sneaker is bad quality. I'm just very skeptical of the idea that the build quality is so much better until I'm proven otherwise. Now, for the sake of the argument, let's pretend that we are in the 1990s and the sneaker that Margiela is selling is literally the same one as the original Gat. The exact same shoe, only with a new name on the tag and a massive markup. So why did that make them suddenly worth 10 times more? This question and the story behind it reminds me of an experiment with the world famous violinist Joshua Bell. He has performed some of the most complex and beautiful pieces ever written for the violin and is usually playing on a $3.5 million instrument. And one day, for the sake of an experiment, he disguised and played for 1 hour in a busy New York station during rush hour. And how many people stopped to listen to one of the greatest violinists of all time? 7. And they only stopped for like 1 minute each. Most people just walked right past him. And yet, days before, he sold out the Boston Symphony Hall where the cheapest seat was over $100. So what does this experiment tell us? Obviously, there are a million ways to interpret this, but what I see is that context matters. If no one tells you that this is a world-class violinist, most people won't even take the time to notice. But what happens if you get told that this is one of the greatest violinists of all time? Will you take the time to listen? In my eyes, a similar logic can be applied to the shoe. The original Get was a cheap utilitarian military sneaker, purely functional, mass-produced for soldiers. But what happened when Margiela's logo was placed on it? The entire context changed. On the most basic level, it becomes a piece of design by the renowned Belgian high fashion designer Martin Margiela, a symbol of status and wealth. Wearing it shows that you know the brand and you can afford it. But if we dig a little bit deeper, beyond the obvious luxury appeal, there's another layer to the story. Margiela wasn't just a high fashion designer. He was known for repurposing, deconstructing, and reassembling garments. His designs often took old, worn-out clothes and transformed them into something new. Coats turned into collars, trench coats cut into dresses, and military socks were unraveled and stitched into jumpers. So in that context, it makes sense that he would take used military sneakers, repaint them, and present them in a new light. And beyond that, Margiela had a reputation for anti-fashion. His work was raw, unfinished, and distressed, a direct contrast to the polished avant-garde fashion of the time. So taking something utilitarian as a military sneaker and stripping it its original function and making it part of a designer collection could be read as being very on brand for him. Now these are just interpretations, partially mine, partially stuff that I found online. And that's because Margiela himself was notoriously secretive. He only gave one interview over his entire career of 30 years within the fashion industry. So a lot of his work is left open for interpretation. So whether what we are reading into the designs is true or not, what I'm trying to show here is, by adding the Margiela logo onto the shoe, it becomes part of a bigger picture. Now when you buy the shoe, you're not only buying a piece of stitched together leather, you're buying into the history of the brand, into the narrative and the artistic vision that it's trying to tell. Furthermore, you're now part of the brand because you're now funding the next step of the brand evolution and the story that the brand wants to tell. And that might be worth something to you, if you appreciate fashion as an art and enjoy the stories and the artistic thoughts behind the designs. Not for me though, I'm definitely going for the original Get. And if you're like me and you like the general design of the replica sneaker and want to pair for yourself, you don't necessarily have to drop $600 on the Margiela version. There are actually plenty of alternatives at different price points depending on what you're looking for. If you want the cheapest option, the original Get is the version to go. You can still find them as military surplus on German eBay and online for like $50. Adidas makes now their own version of the German army trainer, priced at around $100. Puma also produces a nearly identical shoe for around $100. Another great option in a similar price range is Svensson for $200. A cleaner, more refined take on the military classic. If you want something a little bit more closer to Margiela's premium feel, but don't want to pay the whole designer price, how about these? Reproduction Found is a Japanese brand that specializes in recreating vintage military clothing. Their version is priced at around $300. And hey, if you want the Margiela name, just go for it. Just be aware that you don't have to spend $600 to get the German army trainer look. And here we circle back to the initial question. What the shoe is worth mostly comes down to perceived value and what is important to you. Do you value only the construction and the material quality? Then probably designer names don't mean anything to you. But if you're into the artistic side and value the context and the story within the shoe was produced, a brand name might add some appeal to the design. Now I hope you enjoyed the story. I definitely enjoyed my research and trying to understand why someone would buy the Margiela one over the original one. And if you like these kinds of stories, here is another video for you to check out.